Imagine being chosen to marry the most powerful man in England, a king known for his temper, his vanity, and his willingness to destroy anyone who displeased him. Now imagine meeting him for the first time, and within minutes realizing he is already disappointed in you. For most women in Tudor England, that moment would mark the beginning of a slow and painful downfall. But for one remarkable woman, it became the start of her greatest triumph. Anne of Cleves entered Henry VIII's life as a political solution, not a love story. She was brought to England to seal an alliance with her brother's Protestant duchy and to strengthen Henry's weakening position in Europe. The famous artist Hans Holbein painted her portrait, and when the king saw it, he believed he had found his next queen. But the moment they met, the illusion shattered. Henry, expecting youthful charm and glamour, found a woman who was quiet, modest, and completely unlike his previous wives. He called the marriage a mistake, one he intended to fix as quickly as possible. For most women, that kind of rejection from Henry meant disaster. Two of his former wives had already lost their heads. But Anne of Cleves did something no one expected. She turned humiliation into survival. She agreed to an annulment, accepted the king's friendship, and somehow emerged wealthier, freer, and safer than ever before. She outplayed one of history's most dangerous monarchs not with force, but with intelligence and composure. Behind the myth of the Flanders mare, behind the mockery that echoed through centuries, lies the story of a woman who mastered the art of survival in a world built to destroy her. She became not Henry's victim, but his equal in strategy. While others fought and fell and adapted, she learned that sometimes the most powerful move is not defiance but restraint, not to fight the storm, but to let it pass and rebuild in its wake. Her story is one of hidden power, quiet rebellion, and unmatched resilience. From an unwanted bride to the king's beloved sister, Anne of Cleves transformed her fate with intelligence that still feels modern today. She managed her estates, influenced royal politics from the sidelines, and formed lasting friendships with Henry's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. In a world where women's lives were often decided by men, she wrote her own ending, one that outlasted every scandal, every marriage, and even the king himself. So how did Anne of Cleves do it? How did she turn rejection into respect and failure into freedom? The answer lies in her unmatched ability to adapt, to endure, and to quietly win. Welcome to our channel, Words of Time. And in this video, we uncover the incredible story of Anne of Cleves, the queen who never ruled but triumphed all the same. Anne of Cleves was never meant to be a queen, and yet for a brief, remarkable moment, she held one of the most dangerous titles in all of England. Her name is often mentioned in passing, tucked between the better-known stories of Henry VIII's other wives, but few realize that Anne's supposed misfortune was her greatest triumph. While others lost their lives in the brutal theater of Tudor marriage, she quietly won the game that consumed so many. She became known as the woman who walked into the lion's den and left not only alive but honored, wealthy, and free. The court of Henry VIII was no place for innocence or naivete. It was a glittering world, full of ambition, jealousy, and suspicion. Every smile could hide a plot, and every favor could turn to accusation. For a woman, especially one bound to the king, it was a life balanced on the edge of a blade. The fates of Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn were clear warnings to all who followed. The king's love was both crown and curse. Yet by the time Anne of Cleves entered the story, Henry was no longer the charming prince of his youth. He was a man in decline, marked by pain, disappointment, and paranoia. His body was heavy, his leg infected, and his temper quick to ignite. What he lacked in vitality, he made up for in pride and suspicion. Few dared to cross him, and none expected to outsmart him. Anne of Cleves came from the small German duchy of Cleves, part of the network of Protestant states rising in influence during the Reformation. Her brother, Duke William, ruled there, and it was through him that the idea of a marriage alliance reached Henry's ears. England, having broken from Rome, needed friends among the Protestant powers. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's most trusted minister, saw the match as politically useful. A union with Cleves would strengthen England's ties to the Protestant princes and counterbalance the power of Catholic France and Spain. For Henry, the plan seemed sound on paper. What he needed was a wife who could bring peace, loyalty, and heirs without stirring the dangerous passions that had doomed his earlier marriages. The arrangement began not with affection, but with negotiation and portraits. Henry sent the painter Hans Holbein to Cleves to capture Anne's likeness. Holbein's skill was unmatched, and his brush had already shaped royal perceptions before. When Henry saw the painting, he was said to be pleased. Anne's face appeared serene, her eyes calm, her expression dignified. She looked modest, virtuous, and noble, all the qualities Henry now claimed to value. Yet portraits could flatter, and Holbein's art, though honest by his standards, could not convey the subtleties of personal charm or chemistry. Henry's approval, based solely on paint and political logic, would soon turn to dismay, and set out for England in the winter of 1539. The journey was long and cold, and the English court buzzed with curiosity. She spoke no English and had been raised in a culture far removed from the refinement and flirtation of Henry's world. In Cleves, women were modest, shielded from courtly games, and educated more in household virtue than in witty conversation. None of this would have mattered if Henry had been a different man, but he was deeply concerned with appearances and first impressions. When he met her in person at Rochester, disguised in one of his impulsive attempts at romance, the meeting went disastrously. Expecting a reaction of awe or recognition, he instead found a woman who failed to respond as he imagined, and did not recognize him as the king, nor did she fall into the gestures of admiration he expected. Henry, wounded in pride, immediately decided she was unattractive. His words to Cromwell were cutting. He called her a Flanders mare, a cruel phrase that would follow her through history, though few who used it ever met her. From that moment, the marriage was doomed in Henry's mind. Yet diplomacy and honor forced him to proceed. The wedding took place on the 6th of January, 1540, at Greenwich Palace. Those present noted that Henry appeared grim, and Anne, unaware of the depth of his disgust, carried herself with quiet composure. The marriage was never consummated. Henry later claimed that he could not bring himself to perform his marital duties because of her appearance, though it is equally likely that his own health and pride played a larger role. Whatever the truth, he began seeking ways to escape the match almost immediately. For most women, this situation would have been fatal. A queen who failed to please the king risked humiliation, annulment, and possibly worse. Yet Anne's lack of experience became her greatest shield. She did not protest, scheme, or threaten. When the idea of annulment was raised, she agreed without resistance. It was not submission out of fear, but rather a calculated acceptance of the inevitable. She understood that survival required silence more than defiance. By consenting to the annulment, she removed herself from danger and transformed what could have been her ruin into her liberation. The annulment was granted on the 9th of July, 1540, barely 6 months after the wedding. Henry, who had once been eager to call her his queen, now declared that their marriage was invalid due to her prior betrothal to another man and his own lack of consent. The official reasoning was a convenient fiction, but Anne made no objection. Instead, she accepted the title, the king's beloved sister, a unique honor that allowed her to remain in England as part of the royal family. Along with the title came generous estates, including Richmond Palace and Hever Castle, the former home of Anne Boleyn. She received an annual income that made her one of the wealthiest women in the realm, and she was free from the burden that had cost so many others their lives, the role of Henry's wife. Cromwell, who had arranged the match, was not so fortunate. Henry turned on him swiftly, accusing him of treason and heresy. Within weeks of the annulment, Cromwell was executed, his fall serving as both warning and distraction. Anne, however, remained untouched. Her composure, discretion, and willingness to play her part without complaint earned her Henry's respect. Unlike his other wives, she did not challenge his authority or provoke his temper. She visited court often, was treated with honor, and even formed a cordial relationship with Henry's children. Princess Mary, once cold to her father's wives, grew fond of Anne's kindness. The future Queen Elizabeth also found in her a gentle and steady figure during the uncertainty of their father's reign. Anne's life after the annulment defied expectations. While history remembers her as the woman Henry did not want, she lived in a style that few widowed queens or discarded consorts ever achieved. She managed her estates with care and independence, overseeing her servants and maintaining a household that reflected her quiet dignity. Her letters reveal a woman of intelligence and humor, capable of both gratitude and self-awareness. She enjoyed hunting, card games, and the company of trusted friends. In many ways, she became a model of how to survive the Tudor court, by staying useful, agreeable, and unthreatening. Henry's next marriage, to the young and reckless Catherine Howard, only reinforced Anne's wisdom. When Catherine was executed for adultery in 1542, Henry briefly considered remarrying Anne. The idea was discussed at court, but Anne, though polite, showed no enthusiasm. She understood the cost of being queen and had no desire to return to it. By then, she had all the comfort she could want without the danger that came with royal intimacy. Her decision not to encourage Henry's renewed interest was another quiet victory. She maintained her friendship with him until his death in 1547, attending court events and presenting a face of loyalty that kept her secure through every shift of power. After Henry's death, the throne passed to his son Edward VI, and Anne's position at court became less central. The new regime was dominated by Protestant reformers who focused on the young king's education and the governance of the realm. And, being foreign-born and politically neutral, faded into the background. She lived mostly on her estates, enjoying a peaceful and comfortable existence. When Edward died and Mary, Henry's eldest daughter, came to power in 1553 and briefly returned to favor. Mary's Catholic restoration created tension across the kingdom, but Anne's cautious diplomacy protected her once again. She attended Mary's coronation, riding in the royal procession with Elizabeth, symbolizing unity among the Tudor women. Yet despite appearances, Anne's health was declining, and she gradually withdrew from public life. She died in July 1557 at her home in Chelsea, the only one of Henry's wives to be buried in Westminster Abbey. Her tomb, though modest compared to the grandeur of kings, stands as a quiet testament to her endurance. Unlike the tragic figures of Anne Boleyn or Catherine Howard, Anne of Cleves achieved what none of Henry's other wives did. She outlived him, prospered after him, and died peacefully. She was neither executed nor forgotten in poverty. Instead, she secured her future through patience, intelligence, and restraint. The story of Anne of Cleves is often simplified into a tale of disappointment and avoidance, a brief marriage that failed to produce love or heirs. But beneath that simplicity lies a subtle and powerful narrative. She entered a foreign court, faced rejection from the most volatile monarch of her time, and turned what could have been humiliation into advantage. Her strength was not in open defiance, but in understanding her situation better than anyone else did. She saw that survival in Henry's world depended not on charm or beauty, but on timing and perception. When others fought to keep the king's affection and paid with their lives, and recognized that freedom was worth far more than the crown, her example challenges the common notion of power in Tudor England. The women who fought for influence, Catherine of Aragon defending her marriage, and Boleyn pursuing reform and recognition, Catherine Howard grasping at youthful love, were undone by the same force that elevated them, Henry's will. Anne of Cleves alone found a way to exist beside that will without provoking it. She became, in effect, the master of her own fate by appearing to yield. It was a kind of wisdom that history often overlooks because it lacks drama, but it was precisely that calm and reasoned approach that saved her. Even Henry, who had dismissed her so cruelly at first, came to value her. He invited her to court for New Year's festivities, sent her gifts, and ensured her continued income. She was present at the wedding of his daughter Mary to Philip of Spain, a sign of her enduring status. Those who saw her in her later years described her as content and gracious, far removed from the bitterness that might have consumed another woman in her place. She had entered a marriage as a pawn and left it as a survivor, her dignity intact. In the larger story of Henry VIII's 6 wives, Anne of Cleves occupies a unique space. She was neither a victim nor a villain, neither saint nor schemer. Her triumph was quiet, almost invisible to those who equated power with confrontation. Yet her ability to navigate the most dangerous court in Europe without scandal or bloodshed was nothing short of remarkable. She demonstrated that intelligence need not always shout to be effective, and that grace could succeed where ambition failed. Looking back, it is clear that her reputation suffered from the prejudices of her time. Chroniclers, mostly male and loyal to the crown, repeated Henry's insult about her appearance without question. They painted her as dull or unappealing, a woman unsuited for romance. But her surviving portraits, letters, and the records of those who knew her suggest otherwise. Holbein's painting, still admired today, shows a face of quiet strength and composure. Far from being plain, she embodied the modest dignity that her upbringing valued. Her supposed lack of beauty was less about her features and more about Henry's wounded vanity. It was easier for him to blame her looks than admit his own fading vitality or political miscalculation. And story also reveals much about the shifting nature of female power in Tudor England. The court was a place where women's fortunes rose and fell at the whim of men, Yet within those constraints, women found ways to assert influence and preserve autonomy. Anne of Cleves' success was not in commanding armies or dictating policy, but in mastering the art of survival. Her decision to accept the annulment, her refusal to engage in court intrigue, and her management of her estates all reflect a strategic mind attuned to the realities of her environment. She was not simply lucky, she was perceptive. In her quiet retirement, she remained connected to the royal family. She sent gifts to the young Elizabeth and offered support when political storms threatened. When Mary's reign began, Anne avoided entanglement in religious disputes, despite being Protestant herself. She attended Mass when required, but kept her personal beliefs private. This discretion allowed her to live peacefully under both Protestant and Catholic monarchs, a rare feat in an age when faith could determine one's fate. Her death marked the end of an era. By 1557, the England she had first entered had changed beyond recognition. Henry's children had each claimed the throne in turn. The Reformation had reshaped the Church, and the Tudor court had become a symbol of both glory and peril. Through it all, Anne of Cleves endured as a reminder that power, when paired with humility and foresight, could protect as much as it could command. In the centuries that followed, historians often overlooked her, drawn instead to the drama of Anne Boleyn's fall or Catherine Howard's scandal. But recent scholarship has restored her image, recognizing her not as a failure, but as a survivor of one of history's most treacherous games. Her ability to turn rejection into freedom, disgrace into respect, and marriage into independence makes her one of the most remarkable figures of the Tudor age. She proved that sometimes the greatest victory is not in ruling a kingdom, but in mastering oneself. Anne of Cleves may not have worn the crown for long, but in the quiet aftermath of her brief reign, she achieved what every queen desired and few attained: peace, security, and the respect of those who once doubted her. She was, in truth, the queen who never was, yet in another sense, she was the queen who understood best what the crown was worth and when to lay it down. Her life, often reduced to a single unfortunate meeting and a royal insult, deserves to be remembered instead as a story of courage disguised as compliance, wisdom clothed in modesty, and triumph born from what appeared to be defeat. In the ruthless world of Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves won by walking away, proving that sometimes survival itself is the most powerful form of victory. The story of Anne of Cleves took a dramatic turn long before she ever set foot in England. The moment that would define her future began not in a royal chamber or council hall, but in the quiet studio of an artist whose brush had already shaped the destinies of kings and queens. Hans Holbein the Younger, the court painter trusted by Henry VIII, was sent to the Duchy of Cleves with a single task: to paint the likeness of the woman who might become the king's next wife. It was a delicate mission. The future of an international alliance depended on his accuracy and judgment. Holbein was known for his precision, yet even the most faithful image could not capture the subtleties of personality or the spark of attraction. What he brought back to England would later be remembered as one of the most fateful portraits in royal history. The political reasoning behind this commission was clear. England, isolated after its break with Rome, needed allies among the Protestant states of Germany. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, saw in Cleves an opportunity to strengthen the Protestant cause and secure England's place against Catholic Europe. The Duke of Cleves was a powerful figure within the Protestant League, and his sister, and seemed a fitting candidate for the English throne. She was of noble birth, reputedly virtuous, and her family's ties promised valuable political support. For Cromwell, the match was as much a diplomatic strategy as a marital one. He sent Holbein not only as an artist, but as an ambassador of good faith. When Holbein arrived in Cleves, he found a household run with modesty and discipline. The court of Cleves was nothing like the sophisticated world of English courtiers. Life there was simpler, rooted in duty and faith. Anne herself had been raised in seclusion, taught domestic skills rather than the arts of flirtation or courtly conversation. Holbein, aware of the importance of his assignment, painted her with scrupulous honesty. The portrait showed a woman dressed in the rich but conservative fashion of her country, her face calm, her expression composed. There was dignity rather than sensuality, serenity rather than allure. Holbein was not a man to flatter unduly. His goal was to present the truth. Yet the truth of a painted face and the impression made in person are rarely the same. When the portrait reached Henry, it stirred his imagination. The king, now in his late 40s, was weary from failed marriages and political turmoil. The image of Anne suggested peace, modesty, and stability, qualities that appealed to a man grown suspicious of passion and betrayal. He saw in her what he wanted to see, a loyal, gentle woman who would not challenge his authority or disturb his declining years. Henry's vanity, already bruised by age and ill health, longed for a new beginning. He decided to proceed, convinced that this union would restore both his personal happiness and England's political standing. But behind that confident decision lay the seeds of disappointment. When Anne finally arrived in England, the king's first glimpse of her would alter everything. Determined to greet her in the romantic fashion of old chivalric tales, Henry decided to surprise her in disguise. On the day she reached Rochester, he entered her chamber dressed as a humble messenger, expecting her to recognize him instantly by some spark of destiny. Instead, and bound by the manners of her upbringing, received him politely but without any sign of recognition. She could not have known that the man before her was the King of England, and her mild indifference cut deeply into Henry's pride. For a monarch accustomed to reverence, the moment was a humiliation. His vanity turned swiftly to resentment. From that instant, Henry declared himself dissatisfied. He claimed that and looked nothing like her portrait, that Holbein had deceived him, and that he could find no pleasure in her presence. Whether this was entirely true or partly an excuse born of his own disillusionment is impossible to say. What is certain is that the king's disappointment was immediate and absolute. He blamed Cromwell for the match and cursed the portrait that had inspired it. Yet political necessity forced him forward. To break the engagement would have been a public embarrassment and a diplomatic disaster. He could not afford to insult the Duke of Cleves, whose alliance he still needed. And so, on the 6th of January, the wedding took place at Greenwich Palace, despite the king's growing reluctance. The ceremony was solemn, the bride dignified, the groom sullen. Those who attended noted the tension that hung over the proceedings. Henry did his duty, but the spark he sought was gone before it had even begun. In private, he complained bitterly to his advisers, claiming he could not consummate the marriage. He described it in unflattering terms, saying she was no virgin in appearance and that her body displeased him. These comments, now infamous, reveal more about Henry's wounded ego than about Anne herself. His health was failing, and his ability to perform his conjugal role was uncertain. Blaming and allowed him to protect his pride while seeking a way out of the union. Cromwell, meanwhile, faced the king's wrath. The minister who had engineered the alliance now found himself in peril. He pleaded that the marriage must continue for the sake of diplomacy, but Henry's mind was set. He could not bear to live with a woman who, in his view, had deceived him by her appearance. Yet how could Anne have known the expectations of a man she had never met? In truth, she had behaved exactly as her upbringing demanded, modestly, obediently, and with restraint. Her fault lay only in failing to match the fantasy Henry had built from Holbein's portrait. The months that followed were filled with quiet tension, and, unaware of the depth of Henry's revulsion, carried herself with grace and dignity. She learned to speak some English, and sought to please the king in every way she could. But Henry avoided her, and by spring his determination to annul the marriage had hardened. He instructed his council to find grounds to dissolve it. The reasons they assembled were thin but convenient. The absence of consummation and the technical claim that Anne had been previously betrothed to another, Francis of Lorraine, many years earlier. It was a minor, long-abandoned arrangement, yet in Tudor law it served as a useful excuse. When the council presented these findings to Anne, her reaction stunned them. Rather than resist, protest, or demand her rights, she quietly agreed. Her calm acceptance was not the result of weakness, but of keen perception. She understood that defiance would be fatal. She had seen enough of Henry's moods to know that survival lay in submission. Her decision to yield saved her life. By cooperating, she turned a potential disaster into an opportunity for independence. In an act of extraordinary foresight, she requested only fair treatment and security for her future. Henry, expecting anger or tears, was taken aback by her composure. Perhaps guilt touched him, or perhaps her lack of hostility flattered his vanity. Whatever the reason, he chose to reward her obedience rather than punish her. On the 9th of July, the marriage was declared null. But instead of sending Anne back to Cleves in disgrace, he granted her a new title, the king's beloved sister. The title was unprecedented in English history, a compromise between royal favor and personal rejection. It allowed her to remain in England as part of the royal household, treated with respect and supported by generous estates. Henry gave her several manors, including Richmond and Hever Castle, the former home of Anne Boleyn. She received an income sufficient to maintain a household befitting a princess. She was also invited to court on special occasions and given precedence above almost all other women in England except the Queen and the King's daughters. In effect, Anne had lost a crown but gained something far more valuable: safety and autonomy. She was free from the perils that had destroyed Henry's other wives, yet she retained honor, wealth, and status. It was a rare balance in a court where fortune usually turned to ruin. This remarkable arrangement was not merely the product of Henry's generosity. It was also the result of Anne's quiet intelligence. By accepting her new role without resentment, she disarmed the king's anger. Her gratitude pleased him, and her absence from intrigue preserved his trust. She never involved herself in politics, never gossiped about her failed marriage, and never aligned herself with any faction. As a result, she enjoyed a peace unknown to most of Henry's circle. The king, who had begun by calling her unattractive, came to regard her with genuine fondness. He invited her to court for festivities, sent her gifts, and occasionally sought her company. The man who had once scorned her appearance now found comfort in her presence. She was steady, kind, and without ambition, qualities that soothed his restless mind. Even his children warmed to her. Princess Mary, raised in suspicion of her father's wives, grew to respect Anne's honesty and gentleness. The young Elizabeth, still a child, admired her too. Through patience and grace, and achieved what no other of Henry's wives had managed. She remained his friend after their marriage ended. Cromwell, however, paid dearly for the failure of the Cleves alliance. Henry, ever eager to shift blame, accused him of treason and heresy. The minister who had orchestrated Anne's arrival was executed only weeks after the annulment, and, perhaps understanding that any defense of him would endanger her, stayed silent. Her restraint preserved her safety once again. While the court whispered about Cromwell's fall, she quietly adjusted to her new life, surrounded by servants and enjoying the freedom that came with her unique title. In her new role, Anne became a fixture of the English nobility. She dressed fashionably, learned the customs of her adopted country, and maintained a cordial relationship with the royal family. She attended court banquets, tournaments, and holidays, always presented as the king's beloved sister. Her household was large, her income secure, and her position enviable. She could visit London when she pleased or retire to her estates for solitude. For a woman who had once faced the terrifying uncertainty of royal rejection, her situation was nearly miraculous. Her acceptance of the annulment was not only an act of prudence, but also a rare example of self-preservation in an age when royal women were often destroyed by pride or passion, and recognized that to fight for the title of queen would be to invite disaster. The stories of Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn were fresh in her mind. Both women had challenged Henry's will and paid dearly for it. One with exile, the other with her life. Anne of Cleves chose a different path. She transformed a humiliation into an advantage by reframing her identity within the king's world. The title beloved sister might have been born of Henry's need to save face, but Anne made it her own, filling it with dignity and quiet authority. In the months following the annulment, England's political climate shifted again. Henry married Catherine Howard, a young cousin of Anne Boleyn, and plunged once more into the dramas of passion and betrayal. When Catherine was executed for adultery in the year 1542, Henry briefly considered remarrying Anne. Courtiers even speculated that she might return to favor as queen, but Anne, wiser now, showed no eagerness for the idea. She knew that the crown could as easily destroy as elevate. Politely, she let the opportunity pass. Henry respected her decision, and their friendship continued without strain. Anne's years after the annulment were comfortable and stable. She managed her estates with skill, earning the loyalty of her servants and tenants. She became known for her generosity, often extending charity to the poor in the villages near her manors. Her correspondence reveals a woman at peace with her life, occasionally amused by court gossip but never drawn into it. When she visited court, she did so as an honored guest, not a participant in the intrigues that consumed others. The courtiers admired her composure and envied her independence. The sister strategy that had saved her became a model of quiet diplomacy. By accepting an identity that placed her close to the king, yet outside the dangers of matrimony, she found a balance between respect and freedom. Henry could not see her as a threat, and she, in turn, gained the rare privilege of living without fear of royal displeasure. In a sense, she reinvented the role of a discarded queen, turning it into something sustainable and dignified. No longer merely a political pawn, she became a symbol of endurance. The story of Anne's transformation from rejected bride to beloved sister also sheds light on Henry himself. His decision to treat her with kindness was unusual, suggesting that even he recognized the injustice of her situation. Perhaps he admired her humility. Perhaps her lack of bitterness appealed to his weary conscience. Whatever the reason, his treatment of her stood in stark contrast to his cruelty toward others. She remained one of the few people at court who could speak to him without fear. When he died in the year 1547 and mourned him sincerely, despite everything that had passed between them, her life after Henry's death continued much as before. She stayed in England, still enjoying her estates and income. During the short reign of Edward VI, she lived quietly, avoiding religious and political controversy. When Mary ascended the throne in 1553 and returned briefly to court, joining in the celebrations of the new queen's coronation, her participation, alongside Princess Elizabeth, symbolized a rare moment of unity in a divided kingdom. Yet by then her health was declining, and she withdrew more and more to her home at Chelsea. Anne of Cleves died in July 1557, the only one of Henry's wives to be buried in Westminster Abbey. Her resting place remains a testament to her singular journey, from a foreign princess misunderstood by a king to a respected member of the English royal family. In the end, she achieved something no portrait could have predicted. She turned rejection into refuge, misfortune into mastery, and disgrace into grace. The fateful portrait that began her story might have deceived Henry, but time has revealed its deeper truth. Behind that calm face lay a mind far sharper and stronger than anyone at court had imagined. Anne's legacy endures as one of quiet intelligence. She proved that survival in Henry's England did not always depend on beauty or power, but on understanding when to yield and when to stand firm. The woman once mocked for her plainness outwitted a king whose vanity had undone others. Her story reminds us that strength can take many forms, and that sometimes the surest path to triumph lies not in defiance, but in wisdom. After the annulment and her transformation from queen to the king's beloved sister, Anne of Cleves entered a new chapter in her life, one that would quietly redefine what it meant to hold power in Tudor England. Though her crown had been taken from her, she gained something far more enduring: freedom, stability, and a kind of authority that did not depend on the throne. Her story after leaving the royal marriage is often overlooked, yet it reveals a woman of remarkable intelligence and composure who built a secure and influential life within a world that rarely allowed women such independence, and had escaped the dangers that had destroyed others, and in doing so, she found a new kind of strength that few could see but all had to respect. Once she accepted the title of the king's beloved sister, and set about creating a life on her own terms. The generous settlements Henry had granted her became the foundation of a personal fortune that she managed with care and foresight. Her estates were vast and scattered across some of England's most fertile lands. Among them were Richmond Palace, Bletchingley, and Hever Castle, once home to the ill-fated Anne Boleyn. Each property came with its own household, staff, and income from rents and farming. Where many royal women relied on male advisors or stewards to handle their financial affairs, and took an unusually active role. She reviewed her accounts, oversaw improvements to her lands, and ensured that her revenues were collected efficiently. Those who served her soon learned that beneath her gentle manner was a firm sense of order. She did not tolerate waste or dishonesty, and she rewarded loyalty with generosity. Her approach to wealth reflected the same prudence that had guided her through the crisis of her marriage. She did not spend recklessly or seek to display her fortune with extravagance. Instead, she invested in the comfort and stability of her estates. Her homes were known for their warmth and hospitality, a balance between noble dignity and domestic peace. Visitors to Hever Castle described gardens well tended, halls filled with light, and tables laid with modest but elegant abundance. She cultivated an environment that reflected her own character: disciplined, calm, and unpretentious. Through this management, she not only maintained her income but increased it, ensuring that she remained financially secure for the rest of her life. Anne's command over her estates was a rare achievement for a woman of her time, particularly one who was technically a foreigner. In Tudor society, women's property was often controlled by husbands or male relatives, but Anne's position as the king's sister placed her outside these normal restrictions. She was unmarried, wealthy, and trusted by the crown, which gave her an autonomy few could match. In effect, she became one of England's earliest examples of a woman running her own financial empire. This independence was not born of rebellion, but of quiet intelligence. She understood that true power did not require a throne. It required security, resources, and freedom from dependence. Through her lands and income, and achieved all three. Her wealth and stability also gave her a subtle but meaningful role in the political life of England. Though she never held office or took part in formal negotiations, she remained a diplomatic presence, a link between England and the Protestant states of Europe. Her brother, the Duke of Cleves, maintained correspondence with her, and through these letters, and served as an informal bridge between two courts. The Reformation had divided Europe, and Henry's England stood isolated between Catholic and Protestant powers. Anne's continued loyalty and her family's Protestant influence kept communication channels open. Courtiers occasionally sought her advice when interpreting the shifting alliances of Europe. Though she spoke rarely and cautiously on such matters, her opinion carried quiet weight. She had learned the art of diplomacy not from public life, but from survival itself. Henry, recognizing her discretion, sometimes used her presence to reinforce England's image abroad. When foreign ambassadors visited court, and was often among those presented to them, her graciousness and fluency in several languages made her an asset in ceremonial occasions. The ambassadors reported that she appeared content and treated with the greatest respect. For a woman who had once been the subject of scandal and ridicule, this restoration of dignity was no small accomplishment. In the eyes of Europe, Anne of Cleves had become a symbol of reconciliation, the queen who had turned rejection into peace. Her influence was not limited to politics. Within England, and built relationships that further strengthened her position, most notably with Henry's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. These two princesses, born of different mothers and destined for different paths, found in Anne a figure of kindness and stability. She was neither rival nor stepmother, but something gentler, a trusted ally who asked for nothing in return. Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, had known hardship and humiliation during her father's battles with her mother. She had learned early to mistrust the women who entered Henry's life. Yet Anne's humility and warmth won her over. The two corresponded often, and Mary visited Anne's estates whenever possible. Anne's quiet faith, though Protestant by upbringing, never became a source of conflict between them. She respected Mary's Catholic devotion, and in turn, Mary respected her integrity. Elizabeth, younger and sharper in wit, admired Anne for different reasons. She saw in her the rare example of a woman who had mastered her fate without yielding to bitterness, and treated Elizabeth with affection, offering her guidance that no one else could provide. She had lived through the perils of court and understood the price of ambition. Her advice, passed gently and without lecture, would stay with Elizabeth long after Anne's death. In later years, as queen, Elizabeth often spoke fondly of her father's German wife, recalling her as wise and good-natured. It is not hard to imagine that Anne's example helped shape Elizabeth's understanding of what it meant to wield power with restraint. These friendships also carried political significance. By maintaining close ties with both Mary and Elizabeth, and became a rare point of connection between two half-sisters whose relationship was often strained by religion and succession disputes. When Mary came to the throne after Edward's death, Anne's presence at her coronation was both symbolic and genuine. Riding beside Elizabeth, she embodied unity in a family long torn apart by rivalry and betrayal. Her attendance was more than a courtesy. It was a gesture of reconciliation that even the public recognized. The English people, once told that she was a disappointment and a failure, now saw her as a respected elder of the royal household. Her dignity and composure had rewritten her public image. Throughout these years, Anne maintained her network of contacts quietly. She did not involve herself in factional struggles or seek to influence the succession. Her diplomacy was personal rather than political, built on friendship rather than ambition. Yet this subtle influence had lasting effects. Her communication with her family in Cleves helped maintain peaceful relations between England and the German states during volatile years. Her loyalty to the Tudor family, despite all that had happened, ensured her continued safety under 3 successive monarchs. Very few people could claim to have survived the reigns of Henry, Edward, and Mary without falling into disfavor, and managed it through prudence, kindness, and the careful avoidance of controversy. Her household mirrored the balance she kept in her public life. It was large enough to display her rank, but run with quiet efficiency. She employed both English and German servants, creating a blend of cultures that reflected her dual identity. She continued to dress in the English style, though she never completely abandoned the modest fashions of her homeland. Visitors described her as stately but approachable, more concerned with comfort than grandeur. She entertained guests with music and conversation rather than extravagance. Her generosity was well known. She gave alms regularly and supported local churches near her estates. Her charity was not ostentatious but sincere. For many villagers and tenants, she became a figure of maternal kindness, remembered not as a queen but as a lady of compassion. The management of her estates revealed a mind that understood both the practical and symbolic value of wealth. She invested in repairs to her manors, ensuring they remained in good condition for future generations. She expanded gardens, improved farms, and introduced more efficient agricultural practices. Records from her stewards show careful attention to detail. Inventories of livestock, harvest yields, and household expenses reviewed with her own approval. Her ability to balance generosity with discipline ensured that her household ran smoothly and that her finances remained strong even during periods of national instability. In a time when the economy fluctuated due to changing monarchs and religious upheaval, and stability stood out. She did not speculate or gamble. She built her security on patience and prudence. Her independence, however, did not mean isolation. She remained in regular correspondence with members of the court, including noblewomen who admired her quiet strength. Among them were Catherine Parr, Henry's last wife, and later, the Duchess of Suffolk. These friendships gave her a window into the continuing dramas of court life, though she never allowed herself to be drawn into them. When others schemed for titles or influence, and remained content in her estates, watching events unfold from a safe distance. This distance was not indifference but wisdom born from experience. She knew the court's dangers better than anyone and preferred the peace of her gardens to the glitter of intrigue. Her understanding of politics, though discreet, was sharper than her contemporaries realized. She followed the religious changes of England with careful neutrality. Raised in the Protestant traditions of her homeland, she nevertheless conformed outwardly to the shifting requirements of the English Church. Under Henry, she attended services according to the new order. Under Mary, she respected the return to Catholic practice. Her flexibility was not hypocrisy, but a survival strategy. She valued peace over argument and faith expressed through conduct rather than doctrine. This tolerance made her respected even among those who disagreed with her beliefs. The later years of her life were marked by calm contentment. As she aged, her influence over Henry's daughters deepened. Mary continued to treat her as family, granting her a place of honor at official events. Elizabeth, once she became queen, remembered her with warmth and ensured that her memory remained untarnished. In a court where envy and suspicion could destroy reputations overnight, Anne's name became synonymous with dignity. Her careful conduct left no room for scandal. Even those who once mocked her found themselves admiring her longevity and grace. Anne's reputation as a forgotten queen is therefore misleading. While she may not have ruled beside Henry or borne heirs to the throne, her impact was felt in quieter, more lasting ways. She showed that a woman could command respect without wielding direct power, and that intelligence could achieve what ambition often could not. Her life became a model of how to survive and even thrive in a world that valued obedience above all. In an age that celebrated drama and downfall, Anne's steady course was an act of quiet rebellion. She continued to live at Chelsea in her final years, surrounded by a trusted household and comforted by the knowledge that she had navigated one of the most dangerous courts in history without losing either her fortune or her integrity. When she fell ill in the summer of 1557, the news reached both court and country with genuine sadness. She was mourned not as a discarded queen, but as a beloved member of the royal family. Her burial in Westminster Abbey was an extraordinary honor for a woman once considered unworthy of her husband's affections. The stone that marks her resting place bears only her name and title, but behind those simple words lies a life of remarkable wisdom and resilience. The years she spent beyond the crown reveal the full measure of her character. Anne of Cleves was not merely a survivor. She was a builder of stability, of relationships, of quiet influence. Her wealth gave her freedom, her intelligence ensured her safety, and her kindness won her respect. She mastered the art of remaining significant without seeking the spotlight. In doing so, she redefined what it meant to hold power as a woman in Tudor England. She did not command armies or draft laws. Yet she shaped the world around her through the strength of her composure. Her friendship with Mary and Elizabeth bridged divisions that might otherwise have deepened. Her correspondence with her family in Cleves maintained England's link with the Protestant world. Her estates provided work and stability for hundreds who lived under her care. These were not the grand gestures of monarchs, but they were acts of leadership nonetheless. They demonstrated that influence need not shout to be heard. In her quiet, measured way, and helped heal a court scarred by conflict and fear. She proved that grace could succeed where ambition failed, and that true nobility lies not in titles, but in conduct. Her life beyond the crown stands as a testament to a new kind of power, one rooted in self-control, wisdom, and endurance. While other queens were remembered for their tragic ends or passionate battles, Anne's legacy was one of balance. She lived long, prospered quietly, and died at peace. In the volatile world of Tudor politics, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all. The woman who had once been dismissed as plain and unwanted turned out to be the most successful of Henry's wives, not because she ruled beside him, but because she learned how to live without him. Her story reminds us that sometimes history's true strength lies not in those who dominate it, but in those who outlast it. Anne of Cleves' story did not end with her death, nor can it be confined to the few years she spent as Henry's wife. Her life, viewed as a whole, offers a profound study in endurance, intelligence, and the quiet mastery of survival. In an age when power was both gift and curse, she found a way to transform vulnerability into advantage. Her example, though born from the turbulent world of Tudor politics, speaks across centuries about the strength found in adaptability, humility, and self-awareness. What she left behind was more than the memory of a queen who outlived her king. It was a guide to resilience that continues to resonate in every age that values courage without aggression and wisdom without pride. Anne's most striking quality was her ability to adapt. She arrived in England as a stranger, bound by a marriage that was never truly hers, and yet she transformed herself from an unwanted bride into a beloved member of the royal family. Adaptability for her was not a matter of convenience, but of survival. She learned quickly to read the currents of a court where favor shifted as swiftly as the king's temper. When she realized that Henry's affection could not be won and that her marriage was doomed, she did not cling to pride or demand her rights. Instead, she accepted reality, adjusted her expectations, and looked for the opportunities hidden within loss. This capacity to pivot, to move from one role to another without bitterness, was the secret to her success. Her acceptance of the annulment was not an act of surrender, but a calculated decision grounded in clear judgment. She recognized that no amount of protest could restore a marriage once Henry's interest had vanished. To defy him would have been suicide. To submit gracefully was to survive. Yet she went further than mere survival. By embracing the king's offer of friendship and the title of his beloved sister, she turned defeat into a position of honor. She understood that by removing herself as a threat, she could become indispensable. In doing so, she demonstrated a form of strategic humility that proved far more powerful than defiance. Where others had perished in the struggle for influence, and thrived by refusing to fight battles that could not be won. This humility was not weakness, but insight. She saw the futility of challenging Henry's authority and instead shaped her life around the spaces he left unguarded. When he remarried, she did not allow jealousy or resentment to drive her. She remained cordial, even attending court when summoned, always presenting herself as loyal and untroubled. This composure, so foreign to the volatile world of the Tudor court, gave her a kind of moral authority. Henry came to trust her in a way he never trusted his other wives. He could mock her appearance, but he could not deny her dignity. Even his courtiers, who once whispered cruel jokes about her, began to see that she had achieved what none of Henry's more glamorous wives had managed: lasting peace. Anne's adaptability extended beyond personal relationships. She mastered the art of living well within her circumstances, shaping her world rather than being shaped by it. The fortune she received after the annulment could have made her a target of envy or political manipulation, but she managed it with discretion. Her estates were run efficiently, her servants loyal, her household harmonious. She avoided the excess that might have attracted criticism and instead focused on sustainability. In a society that prized show over substance, she built her success on the quiet virtues of patience, order, and foresight. Each decision she made was measured, deliberate, and guided by the long view. She was not simply surviving day to day. She was securing a lifetime. Anne's approach to power was subtle but deeply effective. She understood that influence did not always come from commanding others. Sometimes it came from steadiness in the face of chaos. Her ability to remain composed under pressure gave her a strength that even the king respected. When Catherine Howard's scandal erupted and ended in tragedy, Henry's brief consideration of remarrying and was less a matter of convenience than recognition. He had come to see her as dependable, honest, and unthreatening, qualities that offered a kind of peace he could not find elsewhere. Though Anne wisely declined any suggestion of returning to that role, the fact that Henry even entertained the idea showed how completely she had reversed his first impression. Adaptability alone, however, would not have been enough without humility. Anne's understanding of humility was not rooted in submission but in strategy. She recognized that pride was a luxury few could afford in Henry's England. Those who stood on principle or vanity often fell victim to the king's wrath. Catherine of Aragon refused to yield her title and spent her final years in exile. And Boleyn insisted on her worth and died for it. Anne of Cleves, by contrast, understood that sometimes stepping back was the only way to move forward. She did not see concession as defeat, but as redirection. By conceding the throne, she gained independence. By abandoning ambition, she won freedom. In a world that measured women by their obedience or their downfall, she created a third path, one defined by wisdom. Her humility also shielded her from danger. The Tudor court was a web of jealousy and intrigue, where every alliance carried risk. Anne's refusal to engage in gossip or politics made her a rare neutral presence. People could trust her because she wanted nothing from them. Her calm detachment from courtly drama gave her credibility. Even Henry's powerful advisors treated her with respect, knowing that she had the king's affection but no ambition to exploit it. This form of strategic modesty allowed her to remain relevant without ever appearing threatening. It was a delicate balance, but one she maintained flawlessly. Her humility extended to her interactions with Henry's children, where it took on a more personal form. She did not try to replace their mothers or assert authority over them. Instead, she offered kindness, understanding, and support. With Mary, she shared a mutual respect born of shared endurance. Both women had suffered from Henry's whims and learned to survive through patience. With Elizabeth, she built a friendship that transcended age and circumstance. Elizabeth, who would later face her own tests of power, must have seen in and an example of how a woman could navigate danger with grace. Anne's humility was not about diminishing herself, but about seeing others clearly, understanding what they needed and offering it without demand. Through adaptability and humility, Anne constructed a life that was not dependent on royal favor, but sustained by inner stability. Her home became a haven in a world defined by fear and ambition. She surrounded herself with people she trusted and created a space of peace where she could live according to her own rhythm. The wealth she managed allowed her to act generously, supporting her servants and aiding the poor in nearby villages. Her reputation for fairness spread beyond her estates, and her name became associated with kindness and steadiness rather than scandal. She had turned what began as humiliation into legacy. The enduring lesson from Anne's life lies in this quiet transformation. She showed that survival, especially for those without traditional power, depends not on resistance but on resilience. To adapt is not to yield one's dignity, but to preserve it. She understood that the world cannot always be controlled, but it can be navigated with intelligence. Her choices were rarely dramatic, yet they shaped her destiny more completely than the bold gestures of her contemporaries. She refused to be defined by failure, and by doing so, she rewrote her story. Her ability to pivot in volatile circumstances was extraordinary, especially in a century that offered women little room to maneuver. Each shift in the political and religious landscape of England, from Henry's reign through Edward's and Mary's, brought danger for those who took firm positions, and, with her instinct for balance, avoided extremes. When the court turned Protestant under Edward, she remained neutral. When Mary restored Catholicism, she quietly conformed. To those around her, this may have seemed like indecision, but it was in fact a form of wisdom. She understood that conviction could be private, and that safety often depended on discretion. By keeping her beliefs within her heart and her actions within the law, she ensured her survival through one of the most unstable periods in English history. This adaptability extended even to her identity. Though born a German duchess and briefly an English queen, she ultimately became something broader, a citizen of two worlds. She embraced English customs without abandoning her heritage. Her accent softened, her manners refined, but she retained the quiet discipline of her upbringing in Cleves. This fusion of cultures made her a symbol of unity in a divided age. At a time when England's ties with the continent were strained by religion and politics, Anne's presence served as a reminder that understanding could bridge even the widest divides. Her humility, equally, was not confined to personal relationships, but became a philosophy of life. She did not measure herself by rank or privilege, but by peace of mind. When others sought advancement, she sought harmony. When others chased glory, she valued contentment. This approach, though simple in appearance, required immense strength. It is easy to fight for recognition. It is harder to be satisfied without it. Anne's power lay in her ability to find fulfillment in stability rather than conquest. That, perhaps, is why her story continues to speak to modern audiences who live in times of uncertainty. Her life teaches that adaptability is not weakness and humility not surrender, but tools of endurance. In today's understanding of resilience, Anne's life fits perfectly. She faced public humiliation, personal rejection, and political upheaval, yet she emerged from each test stronger than before. Her survival was not a matter of luck, but of choice. She chose calm over anger, prudence over pride, and strategy over emotion. These choices, repeated over years, created a legacy that outlasted all the drama that surrounded her. The lesson she offers is timeless. Power is not always about command, but about control, not of others, but of oneself. Anne's life also challenges the way history measures success. The women who capture popular imagination often do so through tragedy or defiance. The queen who died for her beliefs, the consort who fought for love, the ruler who conquered through will. Anne's story lacks that drama, yet her victory was in many ways greater. She mastered the art of self-preservation in a world that destroyed those who stood too tall. Her strategy was not to fight, but to endure, not to rise, but to remain. That endurance, more than any crown, defines her legacy. Her ability to read situations accurately and respond with restraint made her a rare figure in history. She anticipated danger, adjusted her behavior, and never allowed emotion to cloud judgment. Even in moments of uncertainty, she projected calm. This serenity disarmed enemies and softened the hearts of those in power. It was a skill that cannot be taught, only lived, the product of experience, intelligence, and courage. She turned adaptability into art and humility into shield. As time passed, her image evolved. The cruel words once spoken about her appearance faded, replaced by admiration for her wisdom. Later historians began to see in her a model of female agency before the term existed. She had no formal authority, yet she exercised influence. She had no public voice, yet her actions spoke volumes. She navigated a male-dominated world with more success than most men of her time, and she did so without leaving a trail of enemies. Her power was invisible but undeniable. Anne's legacy endures because it reflects something universal about human experience. Every era faces uncertainty, and every life encounters moments when pride must yield to practicality. Her story reminds us that resilience is not only about strength in crisis, but also about grace and acceptance. To know when to step aside, when to adapt, and when to hold steady, these are the lessons she mastered. In her world, they saved her life. In ours, they still offer guidance. Her example also restores dignity to the often misunderstood concept of humility. In modern culture, humility can seem passive, but it shows that it can be profoundly active. It is the ability to see the larger picture, to prioritize long-term peace over short-term victory. It requires clarity, courage, and restraint, the same qualities that sustained her through the storm of Henry's reign. By practicing humility as strategy rather than submission, she turned one of history's cruelest rejections into a lifelong success. In the centuries since her death, Anne of Cleves has gradually stepped out from behind the shadows of Henry's other wives. Her story, once dismissed as unremarkable, now reads as a lesson in emotional intelligence long before the phrase existed. She teaches that survival in any age depends on adaptability, that humility can be the sharpest form of wisdom, and that power, when used with patience, can outlast even the most tyrannical forces. Her life is not a tale of failure, but a triumph of foresight. She was, in every sense, the survivor of her age. Where others fought to control fate, she learned to move with it. Where others saw humiliation, she found opportunity. Her strength lay not in resistance, but in resilience, not in dominance, but in endurance. The toolkit she left behind, adaptability, humility, and the quiet power of self-possession, remains as relevant now as it was in her time. Anne of Cleves may have been the queen who never truly reigned, but in mastering the art of survival, she achieved a deeper and more lasting kind of sovereignty. Anne of Cleves' legacy has endured far beyond the Tudor court, stretching across centuries and reshaping how we understand power, perception, and endurance. Her story, once overshadowed by mockery and misjudgment, has grown into a study of grace under pressure and quiet intelligence in the face of one of history's most volatile monarchs. As time has passed, myths that once defined her have fallen away, revealing the truth of a woman who not only survived her circumstances but mastered them. The modern view of and restores her to her rightful place among history's most remarkable figures, not as a forgotten queen or an unfortunate bride, but as a woman of rare insight who turned adversity into opportunity. The myth that cast her as the Flanders mare is one of the most persistent and damaging in royal history. This cruel phrase, supposedly used by Henry to describe her appearance, has colored perceptions of her for generations. Yet when examined closely, the story collapses under its own weight. There is no solid evidence that Henry ever uttered those words, and the label appears only in later sources that relied on gossip rather than fact. The image of Anne as unattractive or clumsy was shaped less by reality and more by the political embarrassment surrounding her failed marriage. Henry, having rushed into an alliance that no longer suited him, needed a convenient explanation for his own impulsive decision. Blaming Anne's looks offered an easy way to protect his pride. Contemporary accounts paint a far more balanced picture. Those who met her in person often described her as pleasant, modest, and graceful, with a natural dignity that set her apart. The artist Hans Holbein, whose portrait helped secure her betrothal, was one of the most skilled painters of his age, known for his precision. His depiction of and was widely considered accurate, even flattering, and his reputation as a truthful artist makes it unlikely he exaggerated her beauty. The disappointment Henry claimed to feel upon meeting her likely had more to do with politics and personal expectation than with her appearance. She did not speak English fluently, and her reserved demeanor, shaped by a strict upbringing in Cleves, contrasted sharply with Henry's taste for lively and flirtatious women. Misunderstanding, not ugliness, doomed their match. The myth persisted because it served a narrative that men in power often preferred, one that excused their actions by belittling women's worth. By painting Anne as unattractive, history allowed Henry to remain the protagonist of his own story, the king wronged by circumstance rather than the man whose whims caused pain. Only in recent decades have historians begun to untangle this distortion. They have revealed Anne as not the awkward foreigner of legend, but a politically astute survivor who handled her fall from grace with unparalleled composure. In truth, she emerged from the annulment with greater wealth, freedom, and security than any of Henry's other wives, which suggests that her intelligence far outweighed whatever flaws her husband imagined. Reclaiming Anne's narrative means recognizing how cleverly she navigated the constraints of her time. She was brought to England for an alliance that was never truly hers to control. When that alliance fell apart, she could have become another tragic casualty of Henry's temper. Instead, she assessed the situation, saw where power lay, and acted with pragmatic wisdom. She accepted the annulment without protest, knowing resistance would bring ruin. She spoke kindly of Henry even after he rejected her, ensuring his goodwill. By turning herself from rival to ally, she gained what no other wife did, a lifelong place in royal favor. Her decision to cooperate was not weakness but foresight. She read the political moment with a clarity few at court could match. This ability to survive and adapt, rather than fight and fall, became her quiet legacy to those who came after her. Later queens, though living in different eras, would echo her strategy in their own ways. Mary Tudor's reign showed the danger of rigidity, Elizabeth's, the triumph of control and patience. Both daughters of Henry knew Anne personally and had observed how she balanced humility with dignity. It is likely that Elizabeth in particular learned from her example. Elizabeth's style of rule, cautious, restrained, and centered on self-preservation, bears the same understanding that power is best maintained by knowing when to yield and when to stand firm. Anne's life was not the story of a woman who lost everything. It was the story of one who defined success on her own terms. Her influence on royal women after her time is subtle but significant. She demonstrated that queenship could exist beyond the throne. She was not a consort defined by her husband's favor or a mother bound by dynastic duty. She was a woman who built an identity independent of those roles. Future queens and noblewomen would inherit the lesson that survival in politics requires balance, discretion, and adaptability. In an age when reputation was as vital as blood, and showed that grace could be a weapon as sharp as wit. Her calm intelligence, her refusal to engage in gossip or drama, and her ability to turn defeat into stability created a model for how women could wield influence without open power. In many ways, Anne's legacy anticipated the modern understanding of emotional intelligence. She recognized that controlling one's reactions could be more powerful than controlling others. When faced with public humiliation, she responded with restraint. When offered friendship instead of marriage, she accepted it with gratitude. These choices, though quiet, had monumental consequences. They allowed her to remain one of the few people in Henry's orbit who escaped his wrath unscathed. While Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard were executed, and Catherine of Aragon died in isolation, Anne of Cleves lived comfortably and peacefully, attending royal events, receiving visitors, and enjoying the rare satisfaction of outliving them all. Her story also forces a reconsideration of how history treats women who choose peace over confrontation. Traditional narratives celebrate rebellion, tragedy, or romance, often overlooking the strength it takes to endure without fanfare. Anne's endurance was not born from submission, but from wisdom. She understood the limits of her position and turned them into advantages. By accepting what could not be changed, she gained control over what could. That ability to distinguish between the two is the essence of resilience, a quality as vital today as it was in Tudor England. Modern audiences find in Anne's life a reflection of challenges that still persist. She lived in a world where women were judged by appearance, usefulness, and obedience, yet she refused to be defined by any of these measures. She transformed a narrative written against her into one of survival and reinvention. In doing so, she anticipated the struggles faced by countless women who have had to navigate systems designed to limit them. Her life reminds us that dignity is not given by power, but preserved by choice. Anne's reputation began to recover in the centuries after her death, as historians looked beyond Henry's version of events. The Victorian age, fascinated by the moral lessons of history, first softened its view of her. Writers began to describe her as gentle, good-natured, and unjustly maligned. In the 20th and 21st centuries, with the rise of feminist scholarship, her image was fully restored. Scholars examined letters, diplomatic reports, and court records to reveal a woman of intelligence and self-control. Far from being the dull and awkward figure of legend, Anne emerged as a symbol of quiet strength. Plays, novels, and television portrayals have since reimagined her as more than a pawn in Henry's political game. Her modern appeal lies in her humanity. She was not a tragic heroine nor an ambitious schemer. She was an ordinary woman caught in extraordinary circumstances who managed them with extraordinary skill. In a culture that often prizes loud defiance, her calmness can seem understated, yet it is precisely that composure that defines her greatness. She did not seek revenge or pity. She chose peace and prospered because of it. In an age of noise and spectacle, her story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful act is restraint. Reclaiming Anne's story also means acknowledging the injustice of how history has remembered her. For too long, she has been reduced to a footnote in Henry's saga, mentioned only as the wife he could not love. Yet in truth, she stands as one of the few people who ever truly outplayed him. Henry's ego demanded constant validation, but Anne refused to feed it. By stepping aside with dignity, she denied him the drama he thrived on. She became the one thing he could not control: content. That subtle defiance, the decision to be happy on her own terms, was, in its own way, the ultimate victory. Her legacy continues in the way modern historians, artists, and audiences reinterpret her life. Documentaries and historical dramas now explore her as a complex figure, not a caricature. Writers highlight her intelligence, her adaptability, and her ability to turn vulnerability into power. She has become a symbol for anyone who has faced public misunderstanding or private disappointment and found strength in composure. In classrooms, her story is taught not merely as a royal episode, but as an example of resilience in the face of systemic limitation. Anne's influence also reaches beyond history into the realm of culture and leadership. Her approach to conflict, rooted in diplomacy, self-awareness, and emotional control, offers lessons still relevant today. In professional and personal life alike, her choices illustrate the strength of patience over impulsiveness, cooperation over confrontation. She showed that stepping back, can sometimes be the most strategic move. Her calm handling of crisis speaks to a timeless truth. That power often lies in how one reacts, not in what one controls. The re-examination of Anne's life also helps dismantle the broader myths about women in power. For centuries, female figures in history were judged by beauty, fertility, or scandal. Those who did not fit the mold were dismissed as irrelevant, and defied that pattern. She was not celebrated for romance or tragedy, but for the less dramatic, more lasting virtue of endurance. Her success lay not in conquest, but in survival. She demonstrated that strength need not be loud, that integrity can be more influential than ambition, and that history's supposed losers sometimes emerge as its wisest participants. In our modern world, where image still often shapes judgment, Anne's experience feels strikingly familiar. She was condemned by appearance and misunderstanding, yet through patience and self-knowledge, she reclaimed her story. Today, her journey mirrors that of many who face misrepresentation and must redefine themselves against false narratives. Her response, not to fight the lie but to outlive it, remains one of the most powerful strategies of all. Time became her greatest ally. Where words once mocked her, history now vindicates her. Her life also carries an important message about the nature of legacy. Some legacies are built on achievements that echo loudly. Others endure quietly, reshaping perception over time. Anne's belongs to the latter. She did not found dynasties or wage wars, yet her influence runs through the centuries in subtler ways. In the way we now value emotional intelligence, in our appreciation of resilience, and in our recognition that survival itself can be heroic. She teaches that it is possible to win without conquest, to triumph without spectacle. As we reflect on her story today, Anne stands not as a relic of the past, but as a figure of enduring relevance. Her intelligence, grace, and adaptability make her one of the most modern women of her age. She redefined what success could look like for someone denied the traditional tools of power. Her refusal to let rejection define her gives her story a universal resonance. In an age obsessed with reinvention, Anne was among its earliest masters. She transformed a broken alliance into a life of security, a lost title into lasting respect, and a public humiliation into private peace. The myth of the Flanders mare has faded. In its place stands the image of a woman who understood herself better than the world understood her. Her journey from unwanted queen to beloved sister, from political pawn to independent landowner, encapsulates the triumph of intelligence over ego. Her example endures not because she ruled, but because she knew how to live, wisely, peacefully, and on her own terms. She showed that survival, when achieved with dignity, can be the highest form of victory. Anne of Cleves offers the ultimate reminder that history often rewards those who outlast it. While her contemporaries fought, fell, and faded, she endured. Her life speaks not to the fleeting glamour of power, but to the lasting strength of self-possession. That is why, centuries later, her story continues to captivate. She was the unconventional survivor who quietly reshaped what it meant to win. And in that sense, she did far more than escape Henry's wrath. She transcended his legacy altogether.